Dr. Rajesh Rawal, who's the president of the Positive Peace Society, to tell us a little bit about the PPS and about the speakers today. So, Rajesh, the floor is yours, and thank you for also making this space possible.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining to our second webinar series between the 50% and the Positive Peace Society. Today we have two wonderful speakers and experts on the topic of memorials and peace building. Let me take the honor of introducing our first speaker for today's webinar, Professor John Lee. He is currently an assistant professor here at Hiroshima University. He is an historian and peace studies scholar specializing in memories of conflict, disasters, and event of human mass suffering. He has completed his bachelor's degree and master's degree in history from University of Philippines, Diliman, and a PhD degree from Hiroshima University. He has done extensive research and publication in the field of peace and memories. Today, Professor will explore the significance of memorials in peace building, and he will walk us through how memorials can help in healing, remembering, and fostering dialogues by using different case studies from around the world. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Professor John Lee. The floor is yours, Professor, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen again. So I hope you can see my presentation. And okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's lecture as we explore the significance of memorials in the context of peace building. And this is a topic that's I'm very passionate about, because this is also what I studied for my dissertation. And a lot of my ongoing work is related to how memorials really foster peace and reconciliation. And memorials are, excuse me, memorials are interesting because they are often perceived as static structures. But in fact, they are dynamic entities that play a crucial role in reshaping and shaping collective memory and influencing society's attitudes towards past events. And memorials, for me, stand really as tangible reminders of a community's or a society's shared history, as it is a representation of the triumphs, the tragedies, and the transformative moments that have defined humanity in general. So today we will examine how memorials function as powerful tools of healing, remembrance, and dialogue. And those three very important aspects of memorials will be the focus of my presentation. We will look into the historical evolution of memorials. We hope to trace from the ancient times to contemporary uses of memorials. Following this, we will talk about how these memorials become mechanisms of peace building. And then we will also look into some case studies. So we will be covering 3 case studies. I removed the United States. Perhaps maybe we should focus on the case studies that are more that are less explored. So we're going to focus on Germany, Rwanda, and the Philippines, and perhaps some relevant conclusions, concluding thoughts during the presentation. So first, to truly appreciate the role of memorials in peace building, I think it's really essential to look back at how they came to be. And unfortunately, this historical evolution really has a lot to do with Western traditions. But that is not to say, of course, that the non-Western context doesn't really figure into the history of or the evolution of memorials. But at least in the contemporary sense, our memorialization design, our memorialization patterns really evolved from Western traditions, and even the way that they are used for peace building. But of course, again, this doesn't discount the fact that there are memorial traditions outside or outside of this tradition. But memorials have really evolved significantly over time, according to the needs of society and their values. So during the ancient times, memorials were often erected to commemorate military victories and honor deities. These structures, such as, of course, you're all familiar with the pyramids in Egypt, or the triumphal arches of Rome, as figured in this slide. They were grand, they were imposing, and they were symbolizing power and glory of rulers and empires. And they served not only as reminders of specific events of the past, but they are also tools of propaganda that reinforces the authority and the legitimacy of whoever is in power. And the example pictured here is the Arch of Titus, which is a Roman triumphal arch built to commemorate the emperor's victory, Titus's victory, in the siege of Jerusalem. And it was, I think, erected in the 1st century. And it's interesting because it symbolizes the power and the glory of the Roman Empire, and it commemorates a significant military triumph, as pictured in this bas relief. I hope you can see this. This is inside the arch. We see a bas relief or figures inscribed into the arch, which shows the spoils of Jerusalem, because during that time they went into the Temple of Jerusalem and took some very important artifacts from that temple. So beyond its commemorative function, the arch also serves as a tool for propaganda, reinforcing the authority and the legitimacy of the Roman rulers. And it's a grand and imposing structure that shows or showcases the triumph of Roman military power. During the medieval period, memorials will take on a more religious character. Like Gothic cathedrals, elaborate tombs were built to honor saints, monarchs, and nobles. And these structures were aimed at inspiring awe and devotion, and reflects the centrality of religion in society, at least in the context of medieval Europe. And pictured here is the tomb of Edward the Confessor in Westminster Abbey, where it's a repository of cultural and historical memory, as it preserves the legacy of a British king, of an English king rather, and that king was canonized as a saint. So here we see the mixing of religious and political, and also how religious devotion figures into the efforts to memorialize. Right? And then during the Renaissance and extending to the Enlightenment periods, we see a shift towards commemorating human achievement and intellect. Many of the statues and memorials created during this time really had this growing emphasis on individualism and humanism. And it was also during this era that we start to see memorials dedicated to national heroes and significant historical events, which laid the foundation or the groundwork for modern commemorative practices. And I chose an example from this period, the statue of David by Michelangelo. This was created during the opening of the 16th century, and the statue of David celebrates the biblical hero David, which symbolized strength, beauty, and the human potential. And it's really a masterpiece that reflects the emphasis on individualism during the Renaissance and the humanism during the Renaissance. And it really is it really set a precedent for memorials to start to be dedicated to significant historical and cultural figures, which laid the tradition for modern commemorative practices that focus on singular heroes and then key events. But I think not there's I think if we're going to look at the different periods, the most consequential for today's tradition is the 19th and 20th centuries, where we see a lot of devastating wars happen throughout the world, specifically World Wars One and Two, which led to the creation of memorials that honored the sacrifices of ordinary soldiers and civilians. So imagine from a focus on emperors and rulers and kings, we now democratize to a certain extent the memorial language or the memorial patterns, because now we start to also honor ordinary soldiers, right? And later on even the victimization of civilians. And these memorials, such as war memorials and cenotaphs, emphasize the themes of loss, of grieving, of mourning, and of remembrance, which again reflects a more democratic and inclusive approach to commemoration. Pictured here is the cenotaph at Whitehall in London, which is a very, I think, a very influential design. This was erected in 1920 in London after World War One, and it was supposed to be just a temporary thing, but because it had such a great impact, it was created into something more permanent. And it was created by Sir Edward Lutyens. And it's quite minimalist because unlike other memorials, it's just an empty tomb, or the cenotaph itself. It's an empty tomb on top of a pedestal, which symbolizes a grave for all those bodies, for all those people who suffered, who died, particularly the soldiers who died during the war, but whose remains were never recovered. So this simplicity underscores the themes of loss, mourning, and collective memory, and it really struck a chord for London at that time, and because a lot of the fighters during that war came from that area, and their families really came to the site to grieve the loss of their family members. So it really is an important memorial in the history of memorialization, where we now start to see it evolving. That we're now focusing on ordinary people dying from the war, and providing spaces for families to grieve and reflect, right? And yeah, and I think up until this day there are annual remembrances held in this memorial, which I think, yeah, thousands of people come here in a united act to remember those who died during the war. In the contemporary period, we see memorials have become increasingly diverse and complex in their design, in their expression of, or how grief, how mourning is expressed. Memorials nowadays really address a wide range of themes: human rights, genocide, social justice, and so on. And modern memorials are also quite modernistic, also in the way that they incorporate elements of public art, of interactive design, and oftentimes also of digital technology, which creates immersive and participatory experiences. Um, Memorials like this one pictured here, the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, we see that the imprint of the two towers, the Twin Towers, they didn't build over it. Instead, they built under it. And they created this gigantic reflective pools, which are also waterfalls that fall into the structure beneath. Through this kind of design, the designers, the memorials, provoke reflection, dialogue, and action, moving beyond mere remembrance to really actively engage with ongoing social and political issues. Now, to understand the profound impact of memorials on peace building, I believe it's best to contextualize with some theoretical frameworks, maybe some foundational concepts that underpin their significance. In particular, memory studies and heritage studies, I believe, are very important fields that provide us valuable insights into the role of memorials as components of collective memory and cultural heritage. And they allow us to appreciate how memorials serve as physical manifestations of memory and how they preserve cultural heritage, how they contribute to the building of identity and the education of future generations. So first, in the field of memory studies, memorials are seen as crucial elements of collective memory, and collective memory, of course, is well, it broadly refers to certain themes that contribute to the pool of knowledge and information that the community or a society holds about the past. And it is often constructed through social processes and is influenced by cultural, political, and historical actors. Memorials are physical structures that play a key role in the construction of collective memory, right? Not everyone holds particular memories of certain historical events, right? But through the physical manifestations of memorials, societies are taught how to remember and interpret their past. And memorials embody the narratives and values that a community deems important. So it's not only memory that is shaped, it's also the values of the community that are shaped. And by commemorating certain events and figures, memorials contribute to the formation of a collective memory that reflects the identity and values of society. However, it is also important to note that memorials reflect selective memory. And this is due to the fact that the decision to commemorate certain events or individuals while excluding others reveals the priorities and power dynamics within society, because we understand that there are certain elements, certain groups, perhaps those with political interests and agenda, that decide what to commemorate and what to memorialize, right? But of course, this is not to discount the grassroots um, efforts to memorialize. But when it comes to physical memorials in particular, or grand national memorials, we have the state or the political elite that really controls the design and what to remember particularly. Um, this selective memory can influence how history is remembered and interpreted. And it we often highlight here that there are dominant narratives that in effect marginalize alternative perspectives. And understanding this nature of selective nature of memorials, I believe is crucial to understanding and engaging with them, right? When we come to a memorial and we see what kind of narrative is presented to us, we understand that this can only be just a facet of the past. It cannot really represent the entirety of the narratives that exist about that particular event. And hopefully, through this critical engagement, we gain a more inclusive and balanced representation and understanding of history. Heritage studies, I think, is also a vital lens by which we view the way that memorials contribute to peace, right? Because heritage studies emphasize the role of memorials in the preservation of cultural heritage. Cultural heritage, of course, encompasses all tangible and intangible assets of a community's identity and legacy. And memorials, as part of this heritage, serve as custodians of historical memory. And that means that through memorials, the significant events and individuals that figured into the past events, particularly related to conflict, are not forgotten. They provide continuity between past, present, and future, and they link generations and foster a sense of belonging and identity, which is why I really like viewing memorials within the context of heritage studies, of course, combined with memory studies. And memorials also play a vital educational and reflective role because they serve as sites of learning where individuals and communities can engage with history and reflect on its interpretations uh, and how it has impacted society. By providing opportunities for education and reflection, memorials help raise awareness of historical events and promote understanding and empathy. And this educational function we will look into more later. It's really particularly important for younger generations to have a continuing understanding or expand their understanding of how they came to be, and what part of them, what part of their identity is built through events of the past, particularly events related to conflict, and how that, of course, contributes to the narrative of peace. And of course, the impact of memorials on peace building through these two frameworks is profound. From a more psychological perspective, we find that memorials provide spaces for individuals and communities to process grief, trauma, and loss. They offer a means of acknowledging and validating their experiences, not only the victims, and of course the survivors, but also the families of the victims and the survivors, which facilitates emotional healing and hopefully closure as well. By creating these spaces for collective mourning, the society can grieve, and particularly the members of, or the family members um, who lost certain members of their family. Through these memorial sites, they are provided a platform for individual mourning, but at the same time, it also symbolizes that it is the whole of society that grieves um, for their lost family, for their lost loved ones. So that provides them with comfort as well. On a more social political level, memorials play a role in reconciliation efforts. So perhaps you could imagine in terms of civil conflict where there are different ethnic groups who go through a process of transitional justice and truth telling, right? And they decide to build a memorial. If and when that memorial represents the multifacetedness of the past and the different elements that contributed to the conflict, then perhaps these different groups can come together in the memorial to regularly reassess, right, the meaning of the past to them, which I believe could foster a sense of or a culture of accountability and truth telling, right? By recognizing that there are shared histories, perhaps shared culpability, memorials promote dialogue and understanding between groups. And of course, for those aggrieved, memorials also are part of this non-material gestures that are aimed at acknowledging and redressing past injustices. Excuse me. So, memorials as tools. Um, how do memorials become sites of peace, or how do memorials contribute to peace building? Um, as I mentioned before, there are three particular answers to this question. And first is healing. Memorials provide survivors and affected communities with spaces to reflect and to mourn. Like in this photo, we see a Vietnam War veteran in a replica of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., becoming emotional in the memorial, right? I think it's one thing to try and be strong and hold all your emotions inside, but again, it's another to express it, right? And to mourn for the loss of the loved ones, right? Perhaps this veteran is crying over the loss of friends, or is mourning the loss of friends, family, and so on. But through memorials, these feelings of loss are validated. These feelings of loss, of mourning, are provided space, which lets them know that the feelings that they experience are valid and they're recognized. Excuse me. When communities come together at memorial sites, they share a collective experience of remembrance, which fosters solidarity and support. Perhaps we can liken this to when we visit memorial gardens to relive or to hold rituals that remember um, family members who have passed away. Uh, and we usually do it, at least in the case of my culture. I'm from the Philippines. We have a particular day where we visit loved ones who've passed away, deceased loved ones, then in that day there's this communal ritual of mourning, and these rituals can involve laying flowers, lighting candles, or simply just spending time in silent contemplation. And I think this is really a way by which memorials really become tools of healing. But of course, not to mention as well that uh, healing also within communities, perhaps for divided communities, as long as, of course, the memorials were built with an attempt to really unify different sections or competing sections of society, of a community, then it can really contribute to healing those divisions as well. Memorials are also vital in preserving historical memory, and educating future generations. Because again, as I mentioned, they're tangible reminders of significant events and individuals. The fact that they are there and a person visits them, then they start having these conversations about what happened in the past and what do they mean for us today. And preserving historical memory within this context, I think, falls under two broad categories. First is that memorials provide a physical space where history is recorded and remembered. And many of memorials actually have a monument and a monument and sometimes a museum as well, or a repository, which acts as literally collections of memory about the past. So here pictured is the memorial hall for the atomic bomb victims in Nagasaki, Japan. And we see here that there are also efforts to collect information from the victims of the atomic bombing. And they house artifacts, inscriptions, symbols, um, these are very important, even documentation. And these are very important in resisting the erosion that could occur through the passage of generations. Second, memorials also help validate the experiences of those who lived through the events being commemorated, right? It's not only the families of those who suffered, but it's also those who were able to witness the event but were not affected. I think there are many concepts that we can talk about, like survivor's guilt, making sense of that experience of witnessing conflict or witnessing events of mass human suffering can also weigh down a person. So through these memorials, we have victims, survivors, and witnesses coming together, and they are being given voice, right? Since memorials are also sites where annual commemorations also occur, and this validation is essential for healing. Now, memorials also play a pivotal role in educating future generations, right? By publicly acknowledging these events, um, memorials allow for understanding of the events of the past. And this educational function is crucial in fostering awareness, understanding, and empathy, right? If you come from a generation where you don't really have a direct experience or direct memory of events, it's sometimes difficult to understand what do these events mean, and what these or how these events impacted, right? It's so difficult for us. Marian Hirsch calls this the post generation, or the generation that didn't really witness conflict. And it is through our post memory, or post memory means memory that is shared to us, right? From the generation that witnessed it to the generation that came after. It is through this post memory that we develop an understanding of the past. And I believe memorials are very important institutions of post memory, because it allows the next generation, or the generation that came after, to have an understanding of the past. And by presenting the stories of individuals and communities, memorials also foster understanding and empathy, right? It's very difficult for a generation that didn't really experience any hardships to understand the hardships of their ancestors or their forebears, right? And this emotional engagement is crucial in building a compassionate and informed society that values peace and reconciliation. If we want the next generation to also understand the importance of maintaining peace, right? Of building peace within society, then we should ensure that these memorials talk to them in a way that they value peace, right? And that they value that the fact that conflict must not happen. Memorials also serve as tools of dialogue, right? And for me, it's very important to have two kinds of dialogue, which are expressed through the memorials. First is an intercultural dialogue. Memorials provide a space where people from different cultural backgrounds can come together to reflect on shared histories. That's why when I first came to Hiroshima, and then when I first came to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, Hiroshima Peace Park, I really appreciated how different peoples from different cultures come here and understand what happened, right? To assess the impact of what happened, and through this sharing of appreciation and understanding across cultural divides, cultural barriers, um, we now see how a multicultural society engage in this form of remembering, right? Memorials really create opportunities for dialogue that can bridge the divides between culture and really foster mutual understanding. Um, Through commemorative ceremonies, public discussions, and educational programs, memorials also encourage people to engage with one another's histories and experiences, where interactions can dispel misconceptions, reduce prejudices, and promote a more inclusive understanding of history. But memorials also foster intergenerational dialogue, right? It connects younger and older generations through a shared remembrance. The pictured here is the an intergenerational dialogue between those who suffered the Rwandan genocide, or those who witnessed the Rwandan genocide, and those coming to really understand what happened. Right, the Rwandan genocide happened 30 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. Um, where and in this hill where a lot of the people suffered, and where a memorial also stands. People from different generations come together to talk about their perceptions of what happened in the past. And those who directly witnessed the event can talk about their experiences so that those who did not witness it can really understand and reflect on those experiences. And many memorial sites, excuse me, many memorial sites really have educational programs, which include testimonies from survivors, veterans, or eyewitnesses. Um, and the idea here is to bring history to life, right? It's not just something that students read from pages of their history textbook, but it's something that is a dialogue, right? They can ask questions, and they can really interact with these memories, which really fosters a sense of continuity and responsibility, which encourages also younger generations to carry forward lessons learned from the past. And of course, these are oftentimes difficult histories that we talk about. Right? Many of these contentions and tensions really exist still within society. That's why memorials play a critical role in facilitating conversations about difficult and often controversial histories. And these are histories that often involve violence, conflict, or talk about historical injustices. And confronting these aspects of the past is really challenging, but it's also necessary for healing and reconciliation. Through these memorial sites, we find that there's this public acknowledgement of how difficult this or contentious this past is, and that it's a shared responsibility among different generations and different groups to unpack and to understand and the complexity behind this past. Not only to recognize and validate the suffering and injustices suffered by the victims, but to provide a safe space for dialogue where people can come and talk about this difficult history. Right? Through these memorial spaces, we hope that they become safe spaces where an open and honest dialogue can happen about painful historical events. Yeah. And by encouraging dialogue about difficult histories, memorials contribute to a broader goal of achieving reconciliation through the telling of truth. We uncover and confront uncomfortable historical truths. These things happen, we should talk about them. And then we also hope to foster a culture of transparency and accountability within society, right? We let them know. We let the future generation or the current generation that didn't experience conflict know that whatever happened in the past cannot remain in the past, and that these will all be uncovered. So it's better to remain true and honest to the goals of just maintaining peace within society. Now let's go to three of the case studies that I really wanted to talk about. Excuse me. Um, and I think it's important that we talk about first this memorial in Berlin, in Germany. I visited this memorial back in 2019, and these are photos I personally took. This is the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin, also called, actually, the official name is the Memorial to the Murdered Jews of Europe. And right, it's a very strong name. It really tells you what happened to the Jews, right? Because sometimes the word Holocaust already becomes muddled in like definitions and complexities. Just right, the memorial tells what it is. The Jews were murdered and they are remembered in this site. This memorial is a reminder of one of the darkest chapters in human history, but it is also a powerful tool for reconciliation and education. This was inaugurated in the early 2000s, although the idea of building it started in the 90s. And it is located in the heart of Berlin near the Brandenburg Gate. The memorial was designed to cover an area of it's a large area. There are, if you see the structures here, they are called the stele, and there's I think around 3,000, less than 3,000 of them, right? In this large field, and under it is the museum and the memorial itself. These concrete slabs from afar actually looked to me like they were like tombs, right? So when you go there, and if I hope everyone can visit and see it, there really is a sense of like feeling like, am I looking at a cemetery? But but it's a cemetery. It's not really a cemetery because you can go inside it, as you can see in this photo, and you can they're in varying heights and varying heights, and the ground is also sloping, so you feel that you are engulfed when you walk through it. You feel that you are engulfed by the concrete slab, so it's a different kind of feeling. And that's what I like about memorials. They really try to provoke some feeling in you. Sometimes this feeling is discomfort, like this is what I felt here. Like it feels I feel a bit disconcerted. I feel a bit confused. I feel a bit, and the designer was telling us that it's actually what the Jews felt when they were being murdered. They didn't know why is it happening, right? So that's the kind of feeling that the memorial hopes to evoke. The purpose of this memorial is to serve, of course, as a remembrance and mourning for the Jewish victims of the Holocaust. It is a space for reflection, for contemplation, where visitors can engage with the memory of those who suffered and perished. So, if you could just perhaps compare this to like an experience of just visiting a museum and seeing things in front of you, here it's like you are engulfed. You are being part of the memorial itself as you go through the winding maze of these concrete slabs. Um, Yeah. So the Holocaust Memorial, the fact that it's in Germany, I think, is has a significant impact, right? Because we know that it's really where the conflict really started, right? It's or at least initiated, right? And what this memorial means, the fact that it's in Germany, is a powerful symbol of Germany's willingness to confront its past and acknowledge the horrors that was caused by Germany during that period, the Holocaust, right? And by creating a prominent and a striking memorial, right? Uh, we find that, and it's of course it's publicly accessible. Germany has taken a critical step in owning its history and in promoting a culture of memory and responsibility. Right. What's interesting was, of course, this is publicly funded, but they also had donations, private donations come in, to help build the fund. They run advertisements in newspapers in Germany, and in written in big letters in the advertisement is that the Holocaust did not happen. Of course, it was very striking for people. What, you're saying that the Holocaust didn't happen? But underneath it in small letters says that people claim that the Holocaust did not happen. If we don't have a memorial, we don't have a reminder that the Holocaust happened. So help build this memorial so that we can remind the future generations that the Holocaust happened. So just the fact that this reminder is very strong here in this memorial goes out to show that we can really still continue shaping the discourse, because the discourse about anti-Semitism, racism, particularly today, right? It's still happening, right? The changing discourse is still happening. The changing appreciation is still happening, and through memorials like this, we publicly discuss the repercussions um, of this event in the past, a very tragic event, and we foster a collective commitment to preventing such atrocities from ever happening again. Right? Next, we go to Africa in Rwanda. As I mentioned before, the Rwandan genocide occurred, I think, around 100 days in 1994. Um, it was a brutal and systematic campaign to mass murder, right? Um, uh, it was the Hutus, another ethnic group, trying to murder all Tutsis, right? Um, an estimated 800,000 to over a million people died. So I don't know if you can really imagine how much people died, but that's just so much suffering, right? And they were killed during this period, and countless others were subjected to horrifying acts of violence, including rape, torture, and displacement. And this genocide really was the culmination of long-standing ethnic tensions and political conflicts, exacerbated by colonial policies and post-independence power struggles in Rwanda. Um, this memorial, the Kigali Genocide Memorial, was established 10 years after the event, which so it marks the 10th anniversary of the genocide. It is located in Gisozi in Kigali and serves as the final resting place of over 250,000 victims of the genocide. And the memorial includes mass graves, a museum, and educational facilities. There is this flame here, pictured here, and walls of memory, where photos and artifacts of the victims are all included. There are even, of course, the remains of the victims are also housed in that memorial. And when this memorial was opened in 2004, it was really interesting because a lot of visitors came, right? But first and foremost, the visitors that came were the family members of the genocide, or the family members of those who suffered the genocide, right? And they really came by droves, like thousands of them, which goes out to show that it's important to create a memorial for healing, because without the memorial, where do these people go, right? Their family members were massacred and were interred in mass graves, and that, I think, robs them of the right to mourn, or the need to mourn for their loved ones, right? Because their loved ones are lost in this mass of remains. So through the memorial, really, we see that it's a very potent site for people to come in and reflect about the loss of their loved one. What's interesting in this memorial is it also validates the suffering experienced, not just by those who died, but also of the survivors, right? Because the memorial helps to address the deep emotional and psychological wounds left by the genocide. It also encourages survivors to confront their trauma and begin the journey towards healing. Particularly in Rwanda, because reconciliation has been ongoing at that during that period. Of course, I hope you're familiar with the Gachacha courts, right? And how they tried to or the elders really tried to settle or to assess the impact at the level of the grassroots. And here we see a historical reckoning, and also the attempt to really memorialize not just the genocide itself, but also the attempt to to reach that level of truth from that period. Okay, so now I share an ongoing work that I've been doing in a more recent case of conflict um, in my home country, the Philippines, where the Marawi siege in 2017, which was a fight between the Philippine government forces and militants affiliated with ISIS terrorist groups. And this conflict happened in an urban center in Mindanao, Marawi, and it led to the widespread destruction and the displacement of approximately 360,000 people. And the establishment of this Peace Memorial Park was actually part of the rehabilitation of the city, um, and part of the government's aim to rebuild Marawi City, to provide a space to provide us communal spaces. And what's interesting here is that since 2017, although the government, of course, is trumpeting that it's okay, we achieved this level of rebuilding, rehabilitation in Malawi. We created these giant structures, but a lot of the residents still are not able to come back to their city, and they are still in the outskirts, in the fringes of the city, where they are housed in quite desolate situations. They don't have access to their basic necessities, particularly water and electricity. Um, and yet the government chose to create this Peace Memorial Park. Um, Interestingly, this Peace Memorial Park was built um, near or leading towards Padian, which is a traditional market, which is the center of commerce in the area. And now the stairs that lead to Padian, the market, now leads to this Peace Memorial Park, where we see um, a newly built statue of Jose Rizal, the national hero, which is also not Muslim. And Marawi, by the way, is a Muslim city. And we also see a peace museum and the School of Living Traditions. And most interestingly, here we see the bullet hole minaret, remnant of a very important mosque in the area. So what the rehabilitation or the rebuilding did was to instead of um, instead of rebuilding the mosque and rehabilitating the mosque, they recreated, or no, rather they built a new mosque and took the old minaret of that mosque and put it in display. Um, this has been a cause of distress for a lot of people, because this minaret is seen by many as a painful reminder of the conflict rather than a symbol of peace. And the perception of this display as more of a tourist attraction, although Marawi has yet to really open to everyone, makes it painful for the residents to see an important site. I liken this to how somebody would cut off the head of of an important person and put it in display. And it has been a cause of pain, really, for some of the residents of Marawi. So here we see that perhaps memorials, although well intended, should always carry the sensibilities and the sensitivities of a community, right? And in this example, at least, I am able to show that not all memorial building processes or decisions when creating memorials are equitable or are acceptable to the people itself, right? And in this process, we hope that memorials are created to represent the sensibilities and the priorities of the people, right? Again, memorial building provides us with a source of comfort for post-conflict societies. But in this context of Marawi, when majority of the people are still living in quite difficult situations, perhaps the focus should first be to provide them with their basic needs and to allow them to come back to their city and then start the creation of any memorial of the conflict. Because the people, the residents who are displaced, the internally displaced people or the IDPs, they can only talk about memory when the conflict is done. The conflict is not yet finished, right? In terms of positive peace, at least, right? They are not yet in conditions where they are allowed to flourish as individuals. So perhaps we should first ensure that they are in a position that they are given justice in a way that they can come back to their city and start rebuilding their lives, then talk about creating a memorial. For me, I think that's a minimum. So, some concluding thoughts. By examining these case studies, I hope that we were all able to gain insights into their roles as tools for healing, remembrance, and fostering dialogue. Right? Healing, because memorials really provide spaces for individuals and communities to process grief and trauma. They validate the experiences of victims and survivors and offers closure and peace. They of course promote remembrance as they are custodians of historical memory and preserves the legacy of past events. They also link generations and diminishes barriers between cultures, and they also foster memorials. Memorials also foster dialogue, rather. They acknowledge past injustices and conflicts, and they foster a culture of truth and accountability. And while memorials aim to foster peace and reconciliation in general, they can also be sources of contention. So thank you very much for allowing me to talk about one of my passions, memorials and peace building. And you can see my ongoing work related to this in my website. Please feel free to visit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Lee, for this wonderful and very insightful presentation. But before we move on to our Q&A session, I would like to introduce our second speaker for today's webinar, Shotaro Akehira. Shotaro Akehira is currently a master's student here at Hiroshima University in the field of international peace and coexistence. His research focuses on community rebuilding and post-environmental disasters in coastal areas. Today, Shotaro will talk us through about the monument in Philippines that was built after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013. He will examine his roles in remembering and storytelling for peace building. So please welcome in joining Shotaro Akehira. Shotaro Akehira, the floor is yours whenever you're ready.
Thank you for that introduction, but I think I can't share my screen.
Yes, allow me to fix it.
Thank you so much.
You should be able now.
Oh yeah, thank you. I hope my screen is visible. How do I minimize this? Oh. Okay. Can my screen be seen?
Yes, Shotaro.
Okay. So, I'll be talking about Typhoon Haiyan as in the context of memories and as an individual who experienced it firsthand. and how it evolved, what happened before, during, and after, but narrowing down specifically on one monument that is in the city currently. There are a lot of monuments in the region that tries to remember Typhoon Haiyan, but for the sake of time, I want to just narrow down on one specific one. So just the general context of Typhoon Haiyan. At that time, it landed in Region 8, specifically at 2013. And it was, if not the strongest storm in the world at that time. Approximately, it affected 14 million people across 44 provinces. And although the last part is contentious, around 8,000 or more or less people died as a consequence of the storm. And a lot of people are displaced. And up until now, their previous homes, they were not able to move back to, and rather they were forcibly relocated to a different area. Locally, the typhoon is known as Typhoon Yolanda. So people still know it as Typhoon Haiyan, but if you go to the Philippines, specifically at Region 8, they'll more likely be familiar with the term Yolanda instead. The location of monuments specifically, if you look at here, it's a satellite image. To the left is year 2012 of the residential area of what it looked like, and to the right, although it's just partially, the area is what it looked like 2 days after the storm. So if you can see, there are like 3 ships that are already on land. Actually, it's more than 3. If I recall, it was around 5 or 7 ships that was washed up to shore because of the storm surge that happened. So the location of this monument specifically was a slum area of the town. And as a consequence, a lot of people died and a lot of people were displaced because of it. So I hope this presents a visual image of how devastating the storm was at the time. So specifically, I want to talk about the ship that was the MV EVA Jocelyn. This ship was originally located across the street of where it landed. So if you could see in the background, there's like an island or there's like a mountain range. So it was washed ashore from that area all the way here. So you could imagine how strong the waves were during the time of the storm. And to note as well, this happened at around 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. in the morning. So for the people who didn't evacuate, they probably lost their lives while they were asleep. So this was a constant reminder as well for people who experienced a storm at the time. Fortunate enough, this is the monument now. So me and my girlfriend visited the place last year, although I visited here before because I am from the area. And this is just a visual representation of how big the ship used to be. So that's the original piece of the ship. So I think it's around 10 feet tall, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm like 5'6", 5'7", so it's around 10 feet tall. And it's called the Yolanda Shrine. So it was built by the local government as a memorial for the ones that were lost during the storm, and also a sense of gratitude for the ones who rebuilt the region as well. It was also built at the exact location where the ship was washed up during the storm. And the area now is a no-build zone due to its proximity in the coastline. I would compare this, the monument itself is beautiful. I'll give it that. They properly maintain it. And if you go on top of the monument, there's a short description of what the storm was like, or a description of the typhoon itself. And there's a Philippine flag also flagged on top of it. And you can see the entire zone, also what it looks like towards the strait. So you can see how close the coastline is from the area. Although the problem with this monument specifically is that it cannot accommodate large amounts of audience, and I don't think it's utilized well in terms of remembrance. So although it's there, there's no proper historical remembrance where students would go here or children would go here. In fact, it's more of a tourist destination, if anything. And people would just come here, take pictures. There's no, if you're fortunate enough, there are people there that can talk about their accounts during the storm. But for the people who used to reside here, they live in an area a few kilometers away. So they cannot give their personal accounts. And as far as I'm aware, the local government doesn't have a designated storyteller or groups of people that could provide a account of what happened during that time. But if they're fortunate enough to meet people, they can. There are depictions or at least messaging about their accounts of survival within the area, saying that I used to live in this area. I was able to experience the storm. I was able to experience the storm surge, and I lost my loved ones as well. So I think that's the missing point of this monument, which could have been executed better and could have been utilized better as well. Because I think this, if you, for the locals there and a lot of people who remember Typhoon Haiyan, the first image that comes to their mind is the ship that was washed up into the shoreline. And I think for the Filipinos, they would remember that. But personally, I feel like as a person, as a local there, they were not able to utilize it to its extent, connecting back to Professor Lee's presentation in terms of dialogue and in terms of healing as well. Because a lot of people still are displaced, or at least aren't in the original place that they live in, and they're a few kilometers away from the city. Because the unique thing about this area is that it's in close proximity to the downtown area, where a lot of the business hub and commerce area is. But now they're located a few kilometers further, so it's hard to connect them, or at least it's a longer commute going to the city and the commerce area now. So that's generally about the monument for the sake of time. And if you have any specific questions, because there's a lot of political implications as well, since it's a local government that built it, and it's a lot of victimization of the government and then straying away from accountability of the lost lives that happened during the storm. I'm free to answer any questions that would be raised up afterwards. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shotaro and Professor Lee, for your very insightful presentation.